Bom dia para quem é de bom dia, boa noite para quem é da boa noite, boa tarde se você acabou de receber essa notificação do YouTube. Então não esquece, segue o canal, clica para linkar, bota o sininho e tudo. E vocês desculpem que eu estou muito nervoso hoje. Eles falam que o homem sempre tem que encontrar com seus heróis e hoje eu estou encontrando uma pessoa que é uma verdadeira lenda dentro do mundo do tarô. Então ele já foi escultor, joalheiro, pintor. Ele tem mais de uma dezena de tarôs feitos. E eu vou ter que fazer a entrevista em inglês. Então, você precisa ligar aqui a legenda e aí depois você coloca opções Translate to Português. E aí você vai ter as legendas para a gente. All right, so now I'm changing to English. I'd like to welcome Robert Place. You are a legend, sir. And we are truly honored to talk to you this afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm sitting here in my house in New York, and the sun is just starting to go down.
Well, the first question that I always ask to our guests is how does a normal person wakes up someday and then 50 years later he's the curator of the Fool's Journey exhibition and has over I can't count. I counted 6 or 7 tarots, but it's even more.
More than that.
Much more than that. And you have the tarot history, symbolism, and divination that's considered one of the best tarot books in the history. So how does that happen? And how's your journey?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not a normal person. Ever since I was born, I knew I was an artist. And when I was a little kid and I learned the word artist, I would tell people that's what I was. I mean, and it was never a time when I wasn't an artist. Like since I picked up a crayon, I just knew I was an artist. And I could draw realistically at a very early age. Usually children go through what they call the schematic stage where they draw sort of like stick figures and concentrate on faces and things like that. It's a little more symbolic, but my drawings quickly became true to life, realistic. Like by the time I was, 6 or 7. So I've always been an artist, and in my artwork, I've been, it's led me to explore unusual things because as I studied art and when I found out there was such a thing as museums, I forced my parents to take me there, and I started looking at paintings, and I was really taken with the surrealists who painted dreamlike imagery, and I was always fascinated with that. So right away my art took me to the place where the imagination blossoms, where we can make we can see images that come right out of the imagination and make them real.
And you were a sculptor, jeweler, and illustrator. How did that came to tarot?
Well, the thing is, when I was in college, I used to paint. I just wanted to paint and be an artist, and I had some paintings in galleries after I got out of college. But it was really hard to sell anything, and I was realizing I'm not going to make a living this way very easily. And I had a degree in teaching, so I taught art in grammar school, and then of course I had the summers off, and when I had the summers off, I had to do something else to make a living. So I would take my paintings and I go to these outdoor art shows that I used to have in the summer. Like I lived in New Jersey back then, and down at the New Jersey seashore, they would have outdoor art shows, and I would go there and sell my paintings. And while I was selling the paintings, I would notice there was a section of the art show for crafts, and there were people making pottery and jewelry and things like that, and they were making a lot more money. So. And I knew, and thing is, I had dabbled in enameling, and when you study art and you study art education, you do ceramics and you do metalwork and you do all different disciplines. Not like I just did painting. So I knew I could make jewelry. I just had to apply myself, and I knew I already did enameling, which was basically just painting with glass, and it was usually applied to jewelry. So I started making enameled jewelry and learned more and more about silversmithing, and then I became. I basically just quit teaching and started doing that full time. And I was in the best craft shows in the country. I was in the Smithsonian show in Washington, D.C. I was in the the American Crafts Association shows, and I would get orders and sell wholesale to like craft shows all over the country, So for years, that's how I made a living. Now the thing is, in college, I was familiar with the tarot already. You know, I was always drawn to books on magic and tarot. And my girlfriend used to read the cards. And of course, back then that was in the 1960s, and she had the what we call the Waite-Smith tarot, which was called the Rider-Waite back then. But we've since, historians like myself try to give Pamela Colin Smith credit for the deck, because she's the one that actually designed it. So my girlfriend used to read the cards, and then I started studying more about the cards. And I got a book on magic, and I saw pictures of the Tarot of Marseille, the older decks, and I decided I wanted to make a deck. So I cut out pieces of cardboard, like small pieces of cardboard, and I copied the Marseille cards, and I got about 4 of them done. And I said, "Well, this is a lot of work, you know." I don't know if I can finish this, because I mean, I went on to do other things. It wasn't that serious to me. So it wasn't until like later, after I was already making a living as an artist making jewelry, that the tarot actually came to me. Like, see, in 1982, I was living in I had moved from the eastern part of New Jersey to the western part by the Delaware River, and I was making a living making my jewelry. And then one night I had a dream. And it was a dream where at first it was just a regular dream, and it had to do with jewelry, because in the dream I saw someone I knew from the craft shows, who was a fellow jeweler, and she was walking ahead, and I followed her into this building. It was like a brick building, and I was following her through. And then later I found out what that dream meant, because she was busy. She was actually, even though she was a jeweler, she was going to start producing craft shows herself, and then I would be doing her craft shows, and that's what the dream was really about. So it was on a totally different subject, the dream, right? And and as I walked through the living room in the building, there was a telephone table, and there's a telephone on the table, like one of those black ones with the handle on top, you know, and you hold it up to your, you know, like people used to have. And back then, when the telephone rang, you used to answer it, because you didn't have answering machines. So the telephone rang in the dream, and when it rang, it woke me into this lucidity, because it was like, suddenly I was very conscious of the dream, that there's a message coming from outside my normal consciousness. And that's what the phone symbolized. It was like somebody was interrupting my dream, just the way a phone call would interrupt your train of thought during the day. You know, it used to be like, if the phone rang, you'd have to go run and answer it and stop what you were doing, right? Okay. So I pick up the phone, and I'm thinking, like, how could someone call me in a dream? I didn't know that someone could interrupt a dream. What's going on? So I pick up the phone, and a dream operator got on, and she said she had a person-to-person call for Robert Place from England. So, and I would accept it. So I said, well, of course I'll accept it. Then she put on this woman who was a secretary for a dream law firm. And she said I had an inheritance coming, and I want to know, and I had to agree to accept the inheritance. And she said that it was coming from an ancestor of mine in England, and that they had misused it had great power, and they had misused it in certain ways. And so there was certain karmic debt attached to it. So to accept the gift, I also had to take on some of the karmic debt from my ancestor. And I didn't even think about that, you know, because that was sort of a stupid thing to say. And I just said, oh, sure, you know, like not even thinking about what that meant. And then I said, yeah, but what is it? And she says, oh, well, you'll recognize it when you see it. It comes in a box from England. It's called the key. So it was so vivid, this dream. I woke up in the morning, just sat straight up in bed and looking, I expected to see the box at the foot of the bed. I mean, that's how vivid the dream was, right? And my wife's looking at me, Roseanne, she said, what's happening? And so I explained the dream to her, and she goes, well, that's really powerful. So now the strange thing was, within a few days, like a day or two more, my friend Scott came over. And see, I was sitting at the kitchen table, and the door there was a back door to the kitchen, and it was to my left. And Scott, who could have been a good friend, just walked in the door, right? And he was holding the Waite-Smith cards, because somebody had just mailed him a set of these Waite-Smith cards. And when he walked through the door, my head turned, like it just turned on its own. Like, why is my head turning? And my eyes focused on the deck, like just totally, my unconscious were controlling it. It wasn't like I voluntarily looked at this thing. I'm just busy doing something, and I didn't look at Scott. I looked at what's in his hands. And then when I saw it, it was like, oh, you recognize it when you see it. And I said, yeah, of course. It was the Waite-Smith deck. And of course, the trumps are called keys. And of course, it comes in a box. It's originally made in England. It's all starting to make sense. Right. Okay. So we're looking through the cards. And then I told Scott about my dream. And I said, well, gee, I have to get one of these decks, you know. Then my friend Ed, like next day or so, my friend Ed came over, who was Ed Coyle, who was he was an astrologer. And he comes over and he had the Tarot of Marseille in his hands. And he said, you know, I have this tarot deck and I have this strong intuitive feeling that you're supposed to have it. So he gave me the Tarot of Marseille. And then I told him about the dream too. And so then I started working with the Tarot of Marseille. And then I realized I had to get the Wade Smith cards also. But back then, living in Western New Jersey, you couldn't just go buy a tarot deck in a bookstore. They weren't around. So I had to go into New York City, get a tarot deck, bring it back. And then I worked with the 2 decks. And I started using them and looking at them. And you know, I remember I'd used the Celtic Cross because that's what my girlfriend used in college. So I started with that, but then I started elaborating on it and like developing my own techniques for reading with them. And I decided I should read books on the tarot. But then every time I would pick up books in the occult bookshop on the tarot, and they were just full of nonsense. You know, like as it's, you know, as a serious artist, I was also an art historian, you know, and I would read these things in the books about tarot and knew that they couldn't possibly be true. Like there were no cards in ancient Egypt. That was nonsense. They didn't have cards. They had papyrus, and the reason they would make huge scrolls out of papyrus is it doesn't lend itself to making cards because it frays at the edges, and so you want to have a continuous thing. They didn't even make pages in books. You know, they had scrolls. They never made cards. You know, so like saying they made these cards in ancient Egypt was nonsense. And then I started trying to find real books. You know, to research it more, and that led me more and more deeper into the cards, and then working with the cards, and it started to become my path.
What was the first tarot that you designed?
Well, okay, so that's here. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna jump to a picture, okay, because I think it'll explain it better. Let me see if I can find where it is here. This is okay. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I was looking, this is in 1987. I was reading a book on alchemy. Because it's interesting because at this time I started having this stoppable, insatiable urge to read everything I could on alchemy and Gnosticism and mysticism and all these things. And then I really didn't, people were starting to get worried about me because there was like stacks of books reaching up to the ceiling all over my studio, and I was doing less and less jewelry. And I realized remember I told you in the dream I was supposed to take on a karmic debt. Well, what happened? My jewelry business started to fall apart. And I kept studying more and more. So one day in 1987, I was looking at this picture in the book, and this illustration was from Harmony Mystique. It was originally drawn in 1636, and it depicts the Philosopher's Stone. Now, the Philosopher's Stone is the goal of the great work of alchemy. It's called the magnum opus, the great work. And no matter what alchemists did, they might make perfumes or medicines or poisons or work on metal objects or jewelry. There's all these different things that alchemists could do, but all alchemists also knew about the great work, and the great work was to create the Philosopher's Stone, which was the ultimate magical elixir. The Philosopher's Stone was called the stone that's not a stone. It really isn't physical. The stone is made out of pure essence. It's made out of what they called anima mundi, the soul of the world. See, because alchemists believed that everything in the world was alive. And to be alive is to have a soul. So the world has a soul, the anima mundi, and that's what brings it to life, holds everything together and gives it unity. So although there are 4 elements, there's a 5th element, which is the soul, which is called the quinta essentia, which is where our word in English quintessence comes from. And it means the essential 5th. The 5th element, the part that holds the 4 together and brings them to life. And now the point the great work was to take an initial substance, work with it, put it through different processes where it died and was reborn, and then the soul came on the outside. And then once you had this essence, this stone that's not a stone, the magical elixir, the ruddy stone, as they said, because it was red. This stone was the ultimate catalyst. It would bring anything to its ultimate highest aspect. So you know how alchemy supposedly was designed to turn lead into gold, but that was only one aspect of the philosopher's stone, because alchemists believed that all metals were of one substance, and lead was a very impure metal, and where gold was the purest form. So lead or copper or tin or any of these metals would, coming in contact with the philosopher's stone, would change into gold. And similarly, the philosopher's stone could heal any illness. It could prolong life indefinitely, but it would turn a normal, ordinary person into an enlightened sage. So the thing is, because it's a stone that's not the stone, you really can't depict it as an object. So to draw pictures of it, these are illustrations of the philosopher's stone. There's two different ones that are very similar. And to depict it, they would resort to using these mandalas. And this particular type of mandala is called the quincunx. You see, in the quincunx, the four elements, or the fourfold structure which defines the physical world, where we have earth, fire, water, air, are set into the four corners, and then the quinta essentia is in the center. Now you see in these you see there's very strong Christian influence here, because we have the crown of thorns, and then the anima mundi, the soul of the world, is shown as a heart, and it has 5 drops of blood like the 5 wounds of Christ. But then there's a rose which represents perfection coming out of it, and it's in the center of a cross, but the cross simply divides the background into the 4 elements. And see how this is similar, except that the crown, the wreath, is brought in tighter, and the rosebud breaks above the wreath. So I was looking at this image, and I was thinking how symbolically it's interchangeable with the world card that we find in the Tarot of Marseille or in the Wade Smith cards. Well, where the heart is like the dancing woman we find in the center of the card, and then the symbols of the 4 evangelists in the corners. See, can you see these now? Can everybody see the cards? Yeah, okay. Yes, okay. So you see, like here, this is the oldest Tarot of Marseille, and here's the Wade Smith card. This is, I collect antique cards. This is another one I have from Milan from 1875, but this one's in the library in Paris. You can see, okay, so the woman in the center is in a wreath like the crown of thorns, and then there's the symbols of the 4 evangelists: the bull, the lion, the eagle, the man. These represent the authors of the 4 gospels in the Bible. So that that's Luke is the bull, Mark, Matthew, and John. And now these, in Christian iconography, these are associated with the fixed signs of the zodiac, and therefore they're each also associated with a different season and a different element. One of the 4 elements. So basically these symbols are interchangeable with the elements that we found in the original one. You see how the 4 elements, and then the heart now becomes, the heart is the woman, and the 4 elements are the 4 evangelists, and then the crown of thorns has become the wreath of time. And see how that's carried through all these decks, right? Okay, so once I realized that, it was like an epiphany, like it opened up like a compartment in my mind. And I realized I was thinking, well, if the final trump in the tarot, the world card, is interchangeable with this image that's the final goal of the alchemical great work, could all the cards in the tarot be describing the alchemical great work? And that was like a magic statement. It was like like these images have power, and it just opened my mind up. And then like this flood of images came out. I saw all these alchemical images I had been studying and seeing how they coincided with the trump cards in the tarot. And so I took out I was studying, I had Jung's book on psychology and alchemy, and it was filled with alchemical pictures. So I started picking up psychology and alchemy, and I'm going through the book, and I was writing in the margins what tarot cards all the different images related to. You know, and this whole thing happened in minutes. Now it set me off. Like I started writing about this and like making diagrams and like, and being I was an artist. You know, a friend of mine said to me, "Well, you know, you are an artist. Why aren't you making this into a tarot deck?" So I thought that seemed like a good idea. So I started. So once I thought that, I started creating the tarot cards. I based them on the alchemical images, and I wanted to show how the tarot trumps could coincide with the great work of alchemy, and so that became my first deck. Now that took about 8 years of research and work, but the whole time it was like it was. See, the thing is, it wanted to happen, so it was like everything sort of fell into place, like magical things kept happening, like what Jung would call synchronicity. Like, you know, I wanted to. There's something I wanted to know about. And I walked into a bookstore, and I was looking around. It was a cult bookstore, and I was at a craft show, and we happened to go to this restaurant, and there was a cult bookstore outside. And the only reason I was in there is because we were late for our reservation for the restaurant, because I did the silly thing. I had a ring on my finger that the friend I was meeting for dinner wanted to buy the ring. So I put the ring on my finger, and then when I got out of the car, I swept dirt off my seat, and the ring went flying into a hedge. Like why did I just throw this ring into a hedge, right? So we went to go have dinner, and I told, well, I lost the ring, you know. So he says, well, that's ridiculous. I said, but we're going to be late for dinner. He said, no, we got to go find the ring. So we go back to the car, and she just walks right up the hedge and gets the ring, like as if she knew where it was, right? And it's like, wow, how'd you do that? So, okay, so we go back to go have dinner, and they said, well, you got to wait now. You're going to have to wait like a half hour because we got to give you a new reservation. Okay, so we say, okay, so to kill time, we go into the cult bookstore. So I go in the cult bookstore, and I'm looking at the shelf, and the book falls off the shelf in my hands, and it's just the book I need.
I believe that, truly believe.
Yeah, so that kind of thing kept happening. Like it's like what Jung calls synchronicity. What's happening is like the unconscious. See, what I learned in this process, and there's much more to it. I go into more of this in my book, but I'm just giving a brief understanding. So the thing is, what happens is the unconscious takes over, just like how when I was sitting at the table and Scott walked in with the deck, and my unconscious took over and made me look at the deck. So I started to realize that my unconscious mind is really in control. Like your conscious mind thinks it's in control, but it isn't. It's just along for the ride. And your unconscious is in control. So the unconscious started to take over and say, look, this is what you need to do. And then so like I said, the tarot chose me. So basically what the tarot was, what my dream was telling me, what my unconscious was telling me, is this is how you explore the unconscious and keep a conversation going with your unconscious. It's like giving yourself a waking dream. You see, because, you know, I always see dream divination was my first form of divination. So I always paid attention to my dreams. That's why I probably had that dream in the first place.
You
so years of research.
You have a notation book.
What'd you say?
Just pay attention, or you have a notation book where you take notes on them?
Oh, I pay attention and I take notes, and you know, I mean, when at first I had so much. Like I was never even a writer, and I'm writing all these notes and writing books, and you know, like keeping track of things. People, why are you doing this? Well, you know, I'll have to, and it was sort of like I would have all these insights, and I'd grab people and say, look, you have to understand, I have this insight, I want to tell you about it. And they go, well, you know, you shouldn't really accost people and tell them these things. Maybe you should write it down, and then they could read it as they want. You know, and so my friends had explained things to me. So, because I wasn't a writer, I was an artist, and now I became a writer too, and suddenly I was writing. So that's another thing. So, like the thing is, one day I was in a health food store in New York City, and I look on the magazine rack, and there's this magazine called Gnosis. Now I had just been studying about Gnostics, and then I'm looking at, there's a magazine called Gnosis, like Gnostics have their own magazine. What is this? So I pick it up, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty. And I'm starting to put it back in the rack. And my friend Sue's with us, and she says, aren't you going to buy that? What's the matter with you? I mean, my friends kept poking me in the right direction. So I bought the magazine, and then I went home and I read it cover to cover. It was really great. It had all these great articles, and then in the back of my mind I hear this voice. It's a voice from the unconscious, which I've since identified as Hermes, and it says, well, they're going to do an issue on the tarot, so you should send them some of your tarot designs. Okay, so the first card I designed was the star card, where it showed the mermaid, who's the siren of the philosophers, and she's expressing blood and milk from her breasts, you know, and there's still stars over her. And so I sent them that picture with some of the other ones I was working on. And then about, you know, a week later, Jay Kenny, who was the editor-in-chief of the magazine in San Francisco, he calls me up on the phone. And he says, is this our place? I go, yeah. He goes, we're not doing an issue on the tarot. Why do you think we're doing an issue on the tarot? And I said, well, I had the feeling. He says, no, but we're doing an issue on the goddess and on Sophia. And there's this article about Sophia, and your illustration came just the right time because I'm looking for an illustration. This fits perfect. So I said, oh, good. So then he said, well, I'm going to put it in the magazine, and I want you to write a one-page article explaining it. So that was the first thing. All of a sudden I'm published, you know, like it's the first thing I ever wrote. So that got published. And then see, the tricky thing about that was, that's why I identified the voice as Hermes, because basically Hermes lied to me to get me to do the right thing. You know? See, I mean, sometimes, you know, because if he said, oh, send it, you know, if he said, oh, look, you got to send this right now because they're going to need this as an illustration for an article on Sophia and it's going to come right at the right time, I would have said, come on, this is totally implausible. So instead he told me they're going to do an issue on tarot, so send them what you're doing, you know, so that made more sense. Anyway, so now the magazine's out there and it's reaching lots of people of similar interest. So Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who was another New Age author, she read the article. She used to get gnosis, and she read the article. She was really impressed with my drawings, my article. So she got in touch with me and said she's writing a book called The Mystical Tarot, and she wanted to put a couple of my cards in the book, and she wanted me to write a section about the cards for the book. So now also I'm in the book. I mean, and you know, the thing was, I had never written before. So, you know, now I'm not just an artist, I'm a writer. Then she asked me, she said she was writing a book on alchemy, and she asked me to be a ghostwriter and write the section on alchemy. So, and then after that, she said, well, what's happening with your alchemical tarot? And I said, well, you know, I have 10 or 12, I forgot how many, like, images done, you know, and so I'm working as a jeweler, and I don't, you know, I can only do this in my spare time. And she said, well, you have to get a contract and they'll give you an advance, and then you'll have money to just free up your time so you can work on it, right? So she said, well, I'll help you do that. So team up with me, and I'll show you how to put together a proposal. And okay, sure. So we put together a proposal and we sent it out to HarperCollins in London, which is Thorson's, right? So we sent that out. Within a couple of weeks, I got a phone call from the editor-in-chief at Thorson's in London. So I'm actually getting, you remember, started with a dream call from England, and now I'm actually getting a phone call from England. And then she said that they really wanted to publish this, that they thought it was really great. Okay, so I started working on it, and they gave me about a year. You know, we did the contract, and they gave me about a year to do it. I'm working on the book, and you know, Rosemary's helped me frame the book, but I'm really writing most of the book. She's just, you know, I never wrote a book before, so they felt more comfortable having an experienced writer work with me. And then you know, I'm designing all the cards, and I'm drawing in pen and ink, and then I had to work out, you know, a technique to put the colors in, and like this is before I did everything on a computer. So I had photograph, you know, I had what we call a film positive, like it's like a photograph of the black lines on a transparent sheet, and I lay that over the paper, and I did the coloring underneath it. You know, I would color the paper and keep laying the lines on to make sure it all worked together, and then I had to send this off to them. So they gave me a year to do it, but it took me 2 years. So they kept extending the deadline, which I learned that's unheard of. Nobody does. No, publishers don't do that usually. Like, they get really pissed, they want their money back. But they really liked what I was sending them, so they kept saying, okay, we'll extend, just keep working. This is the best thing we've done. Okay, so so it got published, and it was weird because the thing was, I'd be talking to my friends who were writers, and they hardly ever get published. There was like trying really hard to get published. Oh, I'm writing a book and I'm getting published. And I said, who's publishing? Oh, HarperCollins, the biggest publisher in the world. And they'd be really pissed at me. Like, how did that happen? But it was like, I wasn't even doing it. It was like, it was supposed to happen. Like the Alchemical Tour wanted to happen. So in 1995, they published the Alchemical Tour. And then HarperCollins in San Francisco got in touch with Rosemary and I, and they said, look, put together a proposal for an angel tarot, because angels, I don't know if you remember, back in 1990s, angels were really hot.
Yes. Yeah,
you remember? Like you couldn't go anywhere. Like you go in the mall and they would have angels selling shoes, people like, and everybody was talking about, they were communing with angels, and like angels were really it. So I said, okay, well, I could do a tarot deck on angels. And I had to put it together really fast because it was such a hot topic. And then, so that got published. And then for a long time, I mean, there was a glut of tarot cards on the market, and they all had really bad artwork. So a lot of the publishers started saying, the printing costs went up, and the publishers got scared of doing tarot decks. So it was really hard to publish a tarot deck for several years after that. So like I had 2 decks came out in 1995, and it wasn't until like 2000 when I got another contract from Llewellyn, and we did the Tarot of the Saints, and then we did the Buddha Tarot. I did that with Llewellyn, and of course I did those on my own because Rosemary helped me get started, but I was better off just writing my own books and going off on my own. Anyway, so what do you want to know about anyway?
At what point did you fall in love with the tarot and begin researching the true history of tarot?
This happened all along, This happened all along. Here, look, let me show you something else here. See. That's about alchemy. Here. Okay, so like with the Alchemical Tarot, like see, this is the Fool card, right? Now see how I based it on this image, this alchemical image, but it's also, I did all this research going back to like, what did the Fool really mean? Because if you look at Pamela Coleman Smith's Fool, that's not really the same Fool that we see on the Marseille deck. What were they really thinking about? So because I kept saying like, okay, these are obviously images made by artists because they're works of art. And the early decks, if you look at the Tarot Marseille, they're really like folk art, right? And yet when we went back to the Renaissance, we saw that there were more sophisticated hand-painted decks that were made for the Dukes of Milan, like the Visconti Sforza deck and decks like that. So I wanted to know, who were these artists who made this deck and what were they thinking about? So like if we look at this Fool, he's really a jongleur. A jongleur is a traveling performer who'll go from city to city. Like he doesn't live in the town he's in. He travels around because he juggles and tells jokes, and that's where juggler and jester in English come from the French word jongleur. So the reason the dog's here isn't because the dog's his friend. You see, the dog's biting his rear end. Now the reason the dog's biting his rear end is because the jongleur is a stranger. He's from out of town. He's traveling through, and the dog's there as a guard dog, and the dog bites strangers. So that's what's going on. And now you see, when we go to the Wade Smith, all of a sudden, oh, look at a nice dog. It's his friend, you see. We totally like, but it's still, there's this element of danger because she put the Fool's on this cliff, like as if he's going to, he has to watch where he's going because he could fall off the cliff. Now, in the alchemical story, this image from Mikkelspacher from 1616, you see the alchemist starts off blindfolded, which means he's ignorant, like the Fool. And that the rabbit comes along as like a guide. It's almost like what happened to me. It's sort of like the dream, right? Now, in the full picture, you'll see that there's a hole in the mountain here, and the rabbit takes him into the hole, and then that leads him into the great work of alchemy. So that's where I have, my Fool is based on the alchemical Fool. So I kept looking for alchemical images that relate. You see, in a way, it sort of relates to both cards. It relates to what the original meaning was, but also what the occultists made it into.
And from all this research, I have 2 questions. The first is for the origin of tarot. Okay, we'll talk about it a bit later. But for all these years of research and everything, what is magic to you now?
Okay, well, as
I'm counting on your dreams and everything that happened.
Well, magic is what happened. I mean, see, the thing is, all the stuff that happened was magic. I mean, most people call it magic. I mean, you could explain it all different ways, but like, Jung would call it synchronicity. But that a book that I need falls into my hands, that's magic. That I have a dream and then I follow the dream, that's magic. That my friend comes walking in the door holding the cards that were the dream talked about, that's magic. So magic is more of a state of, it's more of like a certain consciousness. It's more like magic is about recognizing that that your unconscious is really pulling the strings, that your unconscious is in control. Now, mostly when people think about magic, they think about a magician trying to control their destiny. But you really aren't in control of your destiny. You're consciously, your unconscious is in control. So the only way you have any pull is to communicate with your unconscious. So that's why just using the tarot cards becomes a process of magic. Because like a lot of people think that they want to do the tarot cards just to predict the future, but I find that sort of like pointless. So if we're just predicting the future, it's sort of like it's fated. It's like you're stuck with it. Like like there's all these Celtic legends where the heroes would go to the druids and the druid would predict how they were going to die. And so they would spend their whole life trying to avoid the circumstances that the druid described because they don't want to die, right? And of course, in the stories, it would be all some complicated thing that would sound impossible, but yet it would end up happening. So there's, or in ancient Greece too, like this, the story, the stories are always, there's all these ideas of fate being more powerful than anybody. But the thing is, what I really think about using the cards is I don't want to know what fate has in store for me. I want to know what I need to know right now. I want to see, like, if I'm talking about the future, I'm only doing the forecast. I want to know where I'm headed and how I can steer. So I want to talk to the unconscious. I want the unconscious to talk to me. And then I want the unconscious to tell me, what can I do right now to make things better? Right. So then it becomes like a spiritual process, really. So basically, so magic, if it's really carried out correctly, becomes a spiritual process where you keep improving yourself and becoming more and more your higher self.
Whoa, that's perfect.
I don't know what else to say about that. Okay, that's about it.
It was a great definition. I have the other question here. In the Saints Tarot, how was your research to match each saint to each card?
The thing was, I looked for saints that sort of fit the archetype, but I wasn't as happy with the Saint Tarot of the Saints because, you see, the thing is with the alchemical tarot, the trumps coincide with the story of the alchemical great work. So each of them is a process leading to the Philosopher's Stone. When I did the Buddha tarot, what I did is I harmonized the cards with the story of how Siddhartha became enlightened, and showed how all the icons of Siddhartha and the story of how he became enlightened could coincide with the trump cards in the tarot. When I did the vampire tarot, and I took the story Dracula, and I showed how the story Dracula was really, derived from the Grail legend, and how the Grail legend is one of the things that influenced the tarot in the first place. And so how the story of Dracula could fit into the story of the tarot. But when I did the saints, I didn't have any unifying story. So all I did is I had to find, I found a saint that fit each archetype. But, sometimes they were startlingly accurate. Like St. Francis is obviously the fool. I mean, he called himself, a fool. He called himself Brother Idiot. and he was like in fact, he might be the model for this idea, because a lot of people say, well, in this modern tarot, we think of the fool as sort of an enlightened fool. Like, like to be like a fool could be foolish or could be enlightened, because like in the Wade Smith card, you see how the fool is being guided by the sun and how really being protected. And so the fool, like we called going through the cards, the fool's journey. So, but he was originally, his whole story, like St. Francis was that fool, like he was a fool for Christ. And he'd do silly things, like, and they would work out. He decided that, everybody was going to see the Pope because they wanted to have you know, their religious order recognized by the Pope, right? And he was starting to get followers because people started basically copying him, and he was so sincere and like spontaneous, and people wanted to be like him. So all these brothers started coming to him, and they wanted to be Franciscans. So now he said, well, I should go to the Pope, and I should tell him, you know, to recognize my order. And of course, the Pope, all these people come in, the Pope goes, look, I can't recognize all these orders. You can't just do this. And so this poor beggar comes in, and you know, he comes in barefoot and with his tattered robes and a rope around his waist, and he says that he wants his order recognized. And the Pope says to him, get out of here, just go preach to the pigs, like leave me alone, right? So then the people around the Pope, they watch St. Francis, and he goes out and he preaches to the pigs because the Pope told him to, you know, like a fool, right? So the people, you know, the servants of the Pope, they come back and they say, you know, that man that you chased out of here, he went and preached to the pigs like you told him to. And then the Pope realized that he had just had a dream the day before where this where he saw the church was tattering, like the building of the church was tattering, and this poor beggar came and held up the church and restored it. And he realized that St. Francis was that character from his dream. Like, you know, it was just like it hit him. And then he said, oh, bring that beggar back here. And you know, so he sanctified the Franciscans, and it became a monastic order. See, it was things like that, right? So that was in people, like, and this happened about a century before the Tarot was created. So that was already in people's imagination and minds about this wise fool. It wasn't like something like, it's not some modern thing we made up.
I have another question that's an important one. You called it the Waite-Smith Tarot. I read your article, but I'd like you to talk to our listeners more about your concerns about Pamela Colin Smith as the original designer and how that everything happened.
Yeah, well, the thing is,
on your blog, I know, but could you explain to the audience?
Sure. I'd love to.
I know.
Okay, so the thing is, Pam, here, I'm gonna take this down a second. See, all right, okay, we're back. Okay, all right, you can see me again, right? Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So Pamela Colin Smith was a talented artist. Her style was strongly influenced by the Pre-Raphaelites and Japanese prints. In fact, she lived in England and in New York and Brooklyn, and moved back and forth with her father. Also, she spent some time in Jamaica, and her father had a business. He was a businessman. He was really well connected. Now, he was like they knew some of the most important people in England at the time. Like the thing is, Bram Stoker, who was, you know, the author of Dracula, he worked for Henry Irving. Henry Irving was the most famous actor in all of England, and Bram Stoker was his manager. And they had the Lyceum Theatre in England, and Ellen Terry, who was the most famous actress in England, she also worked there. And then Ellen Terry's daughter was good friends with Pamela Colin Smith. So like she knew all these people, and a lot of those people like that were in the Golden Dawn, like Yeats and all, they were familiar with with the theater, and Pamela, you know, had a lot of connections with the theater. In fact, and Burne-Jones, who was like the most preeminent Pre-Raphaelite artist, he actually designed sets for the Lyceum Theatre when they did the Grail Legend. So you know, she was in this circle. She knew all these people, like famous people. It was sort of like being in Hollywood, you know. So she joined the Golden Dawn, and when she joined the Golden Dawn, her mentor was Arthur Edward Waite, and then what happened is at that time the Golden Dawn split into splinter groups, and then his splinter group, Pamela went with him, so she was in his splinter group, and he was her mentor. But she also knew Yeats, and Yeats was actually higher up in the Golden Dawn, and we can see like there's a lot of influence that Yeats had on her with the tarot cards, because he probably it seems that he showed her some of the lessons that were up from a higher grade than she was actually in. But Waite he was looking for someone to redesign the tarot deck. He wanted to make a tarot deck. He says in his memoirs, he wanted to have a tarot deck that was a modern work of art and not just a folk art. that would be accepted as a sincere work of art. And here she was, Pamela was like, she was recognized. In fact, she had shows like in Stieglitz Gallery. Stieglitz, famous photographer, American photographer, who was married to George O'Keeffe, one of the most famous painters in America, had a gallery in New York, and and besides showing photographs, he showed her paintings there. So like she was really well accepted in the art world. Okay, so he hired her to design the tarot deck. I mean, he didn't design, he did not, there's no, because all the books I read originally were saying, oh, Waite designed the tarot deck. There's nothing, the word design does not fit what he did. To design something, you either have to actually draw it or draw a plan that other people can follow. He never drew anything, he didn't know how to draw. All he could do is describe things with words. So he taught her about his ideas about what he wanted. Obviously he laid it out, but he hired her to design it because she was a gifted artist. Now, even in his memoirs, he talks about 3 cards, like the Hanged Man and the Fool and a couple of cards where he was really worried because the thing was she was so spontaneous in what she was picking up that she was picking up stuff that he had taken an oath to keep the Golden Dawn material secret, and he wanted to design this tarot deck not based on the Golden Dawn teachings because he felt that it would be breaking his oath, and he was really worried that she was so intuitive, she was picking stuff up that he didn't know where she was coming from. So these 3 cards, he said he had a spoon feed of the imagery to calm her, sort of get her to do exactly what he wanted. But that's only on 3 cards in the whole deck. There's 78 cards, and then people acted like that's what he did with the whole deck. Now she was living with Ellen Terry in the countryside where Waite was in London, and they weren't together. And it's like, and people act like as if he was in the studio the whole time telling her what to do. No artist works that way. That's impossible. And in fact, she was noted. See, the whole reason he hired her is because she was noted for her intuition and her intuitive way of working, like spontaneous intuitive working. She would listen to music and she'd paint paintings of what the music said to her. And that's her whole thing, is like being spontaneous. And the way she worked, she would work in pen and ink and watercolors. And like you couldn't change. It's not like you did it on a computer and you could just and Waite could come, oh, change this or change it. You can't change it. You have to redo it, the whole thing, right? And this whole thing was done in 6 months, which is really short. I mean, I never finished a tarot deck in less than a year. And like some of them I worked for 10 years on. So 6 months is a ridiculously short time, and there's no way she was going to redo the work because there was no time. I'm just stupid. And also now the thing is, when it was first published in 1909. It was published by Ryder, so that's why it was called the Rider-Waite Tarot at first in English, because Ryder was the original publisher, even though it was being published by U.S. Games in the United States and other publishers. So the thing is, Ryder had a publication called the Occult Review. So in 1909, I've had a copy of seen a copy of the Occult Review from 1909, and so the editor-in-chief from Ryder wrote an article, like an introduction to the article. Like Waite wrote an article about the tarot with some of Pamela's pictures, but the editor wrote the first thing introducing it. So he wrote the very first thing ever written about this tarot deck was written by him. Okay, and what he says is we're now introducing a new tarot deck designed by Pamela Coleman Smith. It doesn't say designed by Waite. It's the first, it's the editor of the publishing company, and he knows Pamela Coleman Smith designed it, and that's what he says, and that's the first thing ever said about the deck. And then he goes on to say who did extensive research in historic decks. Like, he didn't say Waite did the research and gave it to her. She did the research. So not only she did the design, she did the research. And that's really obvious. And then when you read his book that accompanied the deck, you can see he continually misinterprets her pictures. He doesn't know what he's writing about. He doesn't know her source material for the pictures also are other works of art that she saw in the British Museum. Some of them seem to be from museums in Holland, but also a lot of them are based on imagery she did from her own paintings from years before she even got the commission. And it's even in the because people say, well, what about the major arcana? What about the trump cards, right? Well, even with that, you can see Trump, the Trump cards, he makes mistakes. Like he's describing the devil card, and he talks about the symbol of Hermes is in the groin, like the caduceus, and there is no caduceus on the card. That's in the picture that Eliphas Levi made, And he's describing the life of Levy's pictures and not hers. Or when he's talking about the charity, he's saying, oh, there's a sword in his hand. There's no sword in his hand. That's what Levy said, you know, and Waite was the one who translated Levy.
Yeah, that's just a lot of argument. And in that light, how do you see the relationship between Crowley and Lady Frida?
Well, Crowley, see, the thing is, Crowley, when his tarot, he totally used what the Golden Dawn said about the tarot, and he was sworn to keep secret, where which Waite was true to his oath, Crowley wasn't. So he basically just stole the whole thing. And then he got Lady Frida Harris. You have to excuse my dog's barking away in the back. Can you hear him? You can't hear him? Okay. Okay. So the thing is, Lady Frida Harris was an amateur artist. She wasn't like Pamela Coleman Smith. She was an aristocrat, and she dabbled in painting. She wanted to create a tarot deck, and she sort of like Crowley was looking for someone to design a tarot deck for him. And so he could put out his ideas about the tarot, which are really the Golden Dawn's idea that he stole. Okay, so a friend of his who used to play chess with introduced him to Lady Frida Harris, and then he thought she was just going to do something that looked something like the Tarot of Marseille, but she had this whole other idea, and then she started doing this artwork and look at Art Deco, and it's like, and she had studied this thing called essential geometry with Steiner. And that's why all the images, they're all centered. Look, if you see, there's like a center axis in all the pictures, and so she has this whole developed style that's her own. But then she wanted to express Crowley's idea, so she basically roped Crowley into working with her on the deck, and they worked for years. They were, I took like, I don't know, 8 years or something to work on it, because he kept criticizing what she did and having her do it over and over, like the way if somebody works together. But it's a huge part of it was hers, but he did have a big input, like the kind of input that people think Waite must have had, but he didn't have.
I have one question from Rodrigo Grolla. He's an editor here, and he said he was enchanted by your description how things were produced in the 70s, the 80s. If you could talk a little bit more about how do you pass your drawing to the little cards.
Okay, what do you mean by art technique?
Computers and everything.
Yeah, okay. So my art technique was, the thing was, I did these very detailed pen and ink drawings with a lot of cross hatching and shading. I looked at a lot of the, I have books of Albrecht Dührer's woodcuts, and I basically based my technique on Albrecht Dürer. I wanted to look like a woodcut, even though I was doing it in pen and ink. So, but then once I did the drawings, and the thing is, how do you put the color in? Because I wanted to use opaque color, and that would, obliterate the lines. So a friend of mine who there was a studio here where a friend of mine who was worked with a lot of illustrators, he was saying, well, you should get these film positives done. And so that's a whole, and I even had a dream about that too. So it was like, there was a whole synchronicity to that. So I went into Kingston, which was nearby, and I went to a photo studio, and I brought my drawings. I had them make film positives of the drawings. So then I got these, image, like the line drawings were on a piece of clear film, the same size as the original. And of course, they're much bigger than the actual card.
What's the what's the original size?
Like maybe they're at least 8 inches high. So so then I put paper on top of the film positives on a light box, and I would trace the lines, of the image, the parts that I wanted to paint with flat color or grade, gradation, like in the sky would be graded. So then I took gouache, which is opaque watercolor, and I would paint it in, and then I would tape the film positive to the edge and then lay it over to make sure it all worked out. So keep going back and forth, pick it up and paint, and then lay it on again, make sure it works, and paint. But the thing is, when you did the sky, for instance, where it goes from a darker blue to fading out to a light blue, or maybe to a yellow at the bottom, what I would have, see, the thing is, it's hard to, when you have gouache, it dries a different color than it looks at first. so I would mix, I took the gouache and I took all these little cups and I'd mix all the different blues, the different shades of blue in the little cups. And I paint stripes across of each one. They're all numbered. And then you take a brush with a little water and you feather them together so they blend in. And that's how you do the fade out. So it was a lot of work. That's why it took 2 years.
Yeah, you literally draw the photoliths, called photolights, I don't know.
Yeah, well, you know, like on Photoshop, you can just go fade out, you know, it does it. This took hours to do what that does in a second, you know. So when so later when I started learning about computers, thanks to you know, my brother-in-law, and he got me a computer, and then I realized, you know, when I started working with Llewellyn, I started talking to the art directors there, and like about, you know, color, you know, I would draw the drawing in ink, I would scan it, take the scanner, scan the computer, and then color in computer. Then after a while I said, well, why am I even scanning it? I just draw it in the computer. So yeah. So the Tarot of the Saints was scanned and then colored, and then by the time I got the Buddha Tarot, I was just working on the computer, and I just draw it.
We're almost getting to the end of the interview, and people always want me to ask you, what advice would you give to anyone that is new to Tarot and new to the Hermetic world and alchemy, and want
advice?
To study it? Yeah.
Oh, well, they should read my book.
That is an obvious advice, and we'll bring it to Portuguese too.
Well, isn't alchemy? Don't you have alchemy and tarot in Portuguese?
Yes, we have one book, but I want that the other one you said in Neoplatonicis, the new.
Yeah, the new one. Yeah, well, that's going to be harder.
Alchemy and Tarot, the examination on the historical connection. Mm-hmm. I'm saying the history, symbolism, divination, and Neoplatonics. Your newest one.
The newest one, yeah, it's called the Tarot, Magic, Alchemy, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonism. It covers everything. It's the book weighs 3.5 pounds.
That should cover, I think, everything. And how can we find you?
Okay, well, you should go to my website, robertmplacetarot.com.
Right. This is written in the description of this video. So, well, Robert, thank you so much for everything. I will just finish the recording here, and I will open mics, and people want to ask you some questions.
Sure. Okay, sure.
Thank you so much for your time. It has been a great interview.
You're welcome.
Well, se você chegou até aqui, não esquece, dá o like, segue o canal, eu vou liberar a câmera, a gente vai conversar um pouquinho fechado com ele agora, mas a gente se vê aí no próximo Bate-Papo Mayhem.